The grand halls of the HFY Palace shimmered with golden light, their towering walls covered in symbols of an empire that had ruled for centuries. Captain Leora Kane stood tall in the center of the chamber, her dark brown uniform marked with the insignia of the Dominion's elite couriers. Her boots were still dusty from her last mission, but she had no time to rest. The Queen had summoned her, and no one ignored a royal command. The air smelled of incense and polished metal as Queen Serafina Ishar stepped forward, her long silver robes flowing like water. She was not just a ruler, she was a legend, the only leader strong enough to keep humanity united in a galaxy full of enemies. But today, there was worry in her sharp golden eyes. "You are the only one I trust for this mission, Captain Kane," the Queen said, her voice firm yet filled with urgency. Leora bowed slightly. "I am ready for any task, Your Majesty." The Queen lifted a small sealed container, smooth, black, and locked with royal encryption. "This message must reach Commander Rael Voss. He vanished into the ash-waste expanse 20 years ago, and no one has seen him since. He is the only one who can turn the tide of war." Leora's sharp green eyes narrowed. She had heard the name Rael Voss before. Everyone had. He was once humanity's greatest warrior, a leader who had won impossible battles. But after his final victory, he disappeared into the endless desert of Xiphos 9, a planet covered in sandstorms, deadly creatures, and ancient ruins. "No one has returned from the ash-waste expanse, Your Majesty," Leora said carefully. "I know," the Queen replied, stepping closer. "But you are not like the others. You do not fear the impossible." Leora felt the weight of the words. She had survived war zones, outrun bounty hunters, and crossed entire planets alone. If anyone could complete this mission, it was her. She took the sealed message with both hands. "I will find him." The Queen placed a gentle hand on Leora's shoulder. 20 days. That is all you have. After that, the sands will shift, and his tracks will be lost forever. Leora nodded once. She did not waste words. There was no time to lose. The journey begins. Leora's ship, the Horizon's Edge, landed just outside the expanse, its thrusters kicking up thick clouds of sand. She stepped out, wrapping her face with a light mask to block the dust. The sun burned like fire in the sky, and the wind howled like a hungry beast. She checked her supplies: water, rations, a heat-resistant cloak, a plasma rifle, and a scanner that could track footprints for up to a week. But Rael's tracks would be older. This would not be easy. Taking a deep breath, she activated the scanner. A faint trail of disturbed sand and footprints flickered on her visor screen. Someone had walked this path years ago. The shifting desert should have erased all signs of movement, but somehow, Rael's trail remained. It was almost as if he wanted to be found, but only by someone skilled enough to follow. She started walking. The endless desert. The first day was brutal. The heat made the air shimmer, playing tricks on her eyes. Dunes stretched endlessly in every direction, making navigation difficult. She followed the footprints carefully, adjusting her course when the wind tried to bury them. By the second day, she encountered the first sign of Rael's survival, a small pile of stacked stones, arranged in a way that only trained soldiers would recognize, a marker left behind on purpose. "He's leaving a path," she murmured. By the 5th day, she had lost count of how many dunes she had climbed. Her water supply was still steady, but the silence of the desert was unsettling. She had traveled alone many times before, but this place felt different, as if something unseen was watching. At night, the cold was just as deadly as the heat. She set up a small shelter and activated a thermal blanket, but she barely slept. The wind howled through the dunes, and in the distance, she swore she heard footsteps that weren't hers. The first threat. On the 10th day, the sands changed color, turning darker, almost black. The air smelled strange, like burnt metal. Her scanner beeped softly, warning of movement nearby. Leora gripped her rifle, her heart steady. She had been expecting trouble. A shadow moved behind a dune. She turned, raising her weapon, but saw nothing. Just the endless desert. Then, something lunged from the sand. A dune raider, its body covered in makeshift armor, wielding a blade carved from alien bone. Lyora dodged just in time, rolling to the side and firing a quick burst from her rifle. The plasma bolt hit its target, and the raider fell back, hissing. More figures appeared on the dunes, circling her. There were at least 5 of them. Lyora took a slow breath. You picked the wrong traveler. The first raider charged again, but this time, she was ready. She fired once, then twice, taking down 2 before they could react. The others hesitated. They had expected easy prey. Lyora smirked beneath her mask. The raiders turned and fled, vanishing into the storm. As silence returned, she checked her scanner. The tracks were still there, leading deeper into the desert. Rail was waiting. She pressed forward. The desert stretched endlessly before Lyora Kane, its golden dunes shifting like ocean waves frozen in time. The wind whispered secrets, carrying the distant echoes of long-forgotten battles. 10 days had passed since she started following Railvoss's tracks. 10 days of relentless sun, icy nights, and the ever-present feeling that something unseen moved just beyond her sight. She adjusted the strap of her supply pack and checked her scanner. The footprints were still there, faint but unmistakable. It was almost impossible. Tracks this old should have been erased by the shifting sands. Yet they remained, guiding her deeper into the ash-waste expanse. Why? Railvoss was no ordinary soldier. He had been a tactical genius, a warrior who won impossible battles and disappeared without a trace. Now his tracks told a story. He wasn't lost. He had left this trail deliberately. And she was getting closer. Signs of life. By midday, the sun burned overhead, turning the sky into a blinding sheet of white. Lyora's water supply was running low, but she knew how to ration it. Every sip had to count. A few hours later, her scanner beeped softly. She froze. Not footprints this time. Something else. She knelt and brushed the sand away, revealing something metallic, a rusted insignia, half buried beneath the surface. She picked it up and turned it in her fingers. It was human military, an emblem from the old wars. Railvoss had been here. She scanned the horizon, looking for more clues. Then she saw it, a shimmer in the distance, like sunlight reflecting off metal. She moved carefully, her rifle ready. As she got closer, the object took shape, a half-buried escape pod, its hull scorched and broken. The door had been forced open from the inside. She stepped forward and peered inside. Nothing. Just old, dry bones and scraps of torn fabric. Whoever had crashed here was long dead. But next to the remains, scratched into the metal wall, was a message in Old Earth script. Not alone. Keep moving. Lyora's pulse quickened. She turned, scanning the dunes. The silence suddenly felt heavy. Someone, or something, was out there. The hunter becomes the hunted. That night, Lyora set up camp in the shadow of a massive rock formation. It offered some protection from the wind, but not from whatever was following her. She sat by a small fire, rationing a piece of dried protein. Her eyes stayed on the scanner, watching for movement. Then she heard it, a faint clicking sound. Slow, deliberate. Not the wind, not an animal. She extinguished the fire instantly and pressed her back against the rock, gripping her rifle. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Footsteps, too light to be human. She switched her visor to night vision and peered into the darkness. There, a shadow moved between the dunes, watching her. Lyora didn't breathe. She didn't move. If it thought she hadn't seen it, she could set a trap. The figure crept closer, then closer. In a flash, she activated her rifle's targeting system and fired. The plasma bolt lit up the night, striking the sand just inches from the creature's feet. A guttural hiss filled the air, and the shadow darted away with inhuman speed. Leora cursed. It was fast. Too fast. She aimed again, but it was already gone. She waited for hours, but the desert was silent once more. By dawn, she packed her gear and moved on. She wasn't going to wait for it to return. The forgotten battle. By the 12th day, the landscape changed. The golden dunes gave way to jagged cliffs and dark, cracked earth, as if some ancient force had torn the planet open. And there, scattered across the valley, were the remains of a battle. Leora stopped at the edge of a canyon, staring down at the wreckage. Burnt-out ships, crushed mechs, skeletons of war machines rusting under the desert sun. This was a graveyard. She climbed down carefully, stepping over the shattered remains of fallen soldiers, both human and alien. Rael Voss had been part of this battle. Maybe he had even led it. But what had happened here? Then she saw it. A large metal structure buried in the sand. Unlike the others, this one was intact. Its entrance was half covered, but still open. Someone had been inside recently. Leora's grip tightened on her rifle. She wasn't alone. The truth buried in sand. She moved toward the entrance, stepping carefully over wreckage and bones. The inside was cool and dark, a stark contrast to the burning heat outside. Her visor adjusted, revealing a tunnel leading deeper underground. The walls were marked with strange symbols, some human, some alien. And on the floor, partially covered in dust, were more footprints. Fresh ones. Leora exhaled slowly. Rael Voss was here. Somewhere in this place, he was waiting. She checked her rifle and took a step forward. The desert had tested her. The shadows had followed her. Now she was going to find out the truth. Leora Kane stood at the entrance of the buried structure, her pulse steady, but her mind racing. Rael Voss had been here. The fresh footprints in the dust were proof. But was he still inside, or had she arrived too late? She took a slow breath and stepped forward. The air inside was cooler, but it carried the scent of rust, old fire, and something else, something ancient. Her visor's night vision adjusted to the dim surroundings, revealing metallic walls covered in battle scars and strange symbols. She moved carefully, her boots making almost no sound on the cold floor. The tunnel sloped downward, leading her deeper underground. Then she heard it. A faint mechanical hum, like a machine waking up after a long sleep. Leora froze. She wasn't alone. Echoes of the past. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, half buried in sand. Old war machines stood silent in the darkness, their broken forms covered in dust. Some were human-made, others were not. Leora swept her rifle across the room, scanning for movement. The footprints led toward a large, rusted control panel in the center of the chamber. Wires and cables snaked across the floor like dead vines. She knelt beside the console, brushing sand away from its surface. The screen was cracked, but it flickered with a single blinking message in Old Earth script. The war is not over. Leora's fingers tightened around her weapon. Had Rael left this message? Before she could investigate further, the ground trembled. A distant sound echoed through the tunnels, metal scraping against metal. Leora turned sharply, aiming her rifle into the darkness. Something was moving. The hunter revealed. The clicking sound returned, slow and deliberate. Not footsteps, something else. Leora stepped back, her body tense. Her instincts screamed danger. Then, from the shadows, they came. Tall figures wrapped in tattered cloaks, their eyes glowing a sickly green. Their bodies were part metal, part flesh, as if something had twisted them from their original form. Their fingers ended in sharp, claw-like blades. Dune phantoms. Leora had heard stories of them. Desert ghosts, remnants of forgotten wars. Some said they were ancient soldiers, cursed to wander the sands forever. Others claimed they were failed experiments, abandoned by their creators. Either way, they were killers. Leora had seconds to react. The first phantom lunged, its blade-like hand slashing through the air. Leora dodged, rolling to the side as she fired a precise shot. The plasma bolt struck its chest, but instead of falling, it shrieked and kept coming. She cursed. They were fast. 2 more phantoms closed in, moving with unnatural speed. Lyora fired again, this time aiming for the joints. The first fell, its legs giving out. The second twisted away, dodging the shot. Lyora didn't wait. She sprinted toward the exit, knowing she couldn't fight them all in an enclosed space. The phantoms pursued, their claws scraping against metal walls. As she reached the tunnel, a sudden flash of movement stopped her. A figure dropped from above, a man, moving like a ghost. His long cloak billowed, and in his hands he wielded a curved energy blade that hummed with deadly light. In a single fluid motion, he cut through the nearest phantom, its body collapsing into sparks and dust. The others hesitated. The man turned slightly, revealing a scared face and piercing blue eyes. His expression was calm, but there was something fierce behind it. Lyora recognized him instantly. Rael Voss. A warrior's warning. Rael didn't speak. He simply raised his blade, daring the remaining phantoms to attack. For a moment, the creatures hesitated. Then they let out an unearthly screech and vanished into the tunnels, their bodies dissolving into the darkness. Silence fell. Lyora exhaled, lowering her rifle. "You're real." Rael turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You shouldn't have come." Lyora held up the sealed message from the Queen. "I had no choice." Rael stared at the container for a long moment, then sighed. "This place is dangerous. More than you realize." "I noticed," Lyora said dryly. "Those things, Doom Phantoms, what are they?" Rael's jaw tightened. Not phantoms. They were soldiers. Once. Lyora frowned. "Soldiers?" Rael nodded. "Victims of an old war, twisted by something buried beneath this desert." He turned away, walking toward the control panel. The blinking message still pulsed softly. "The war is not over." Lyora followed. "What does that mean?" Rael's fingers brushed over the screen. "It means the enemy we thought we destroyed is still here." Lyora felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" Rael's eyes met hers. "The Ketheri swarm." Lyora's breath caught. The Ketheri, the monstrous race that had nearly wiped out humanity a century ago. They had been defeated, or so history claimed. But Rael was telling her they weren't just alive. They were waking up. The war awakens. Lyora tightened her grip on her weapon. "If they're still alive, we have to warn the Queen." Rael shook his head. "It's already too late. They'd been preparing for this for years." Lyora felt the weight of the sealed message in her hands. Had the Queen known? Had she sent Lyora here not just to find Rael, but to confirm the worst possible truth? Outside, the wind howled louder, carrying with it a distant, inhuman sound. Rael grabbed his blade. "We need to move. Now." Lyora didn't argue. The war that humanity thought was over. Lyora followed Rael through the dark tunnels, her heart pounding with each step. The Ketheri swarm was alive. The war humanity thought it had won was only sleeping beneath the sands. Rael moved with purpose, his energy blade still humming faintly in his hand. His face was set in hard lines, his mind somewhere far away, maybe in the past, where he had fought this enemy before. Lyora had 100 questions, but she knew now wasn't the time. The phantoms had retreated, but they would return. And worse, something deeper in this ruin was waking up. She glanced down at the sealed message she carried. Had the Queen known this would happen? Had she sent Lyora not just to find Rael, but to witness this terrible truth for herself? The sound of grinding metal echoed through the tunnels. The ground trembled. Something was coming. Rael stopped at a doorway and quickly worked the controls. The metal door slid open with a hiss, revealing another chamber beyond. "Inside." "Now," he ordered. Lyora stepped through, and the door sealed behind them. The lost command center. The room was massive, filled with abandoned technology, its screens flickering weakly. Unlike the ancient war machines above, these systems still had power. Rail moved to a large console, wiping dust off the screen. Strange symbols glowed faintly, shifting between human language and something alien. Leora peered over his shoulder. What is this place? Rail's jaw tightened. It was a human base during the war. One of the last. When the final battle happened, everyone assumed it was destroyed. He tapped a few buttons, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a map of the underground complex. Leora's eyes widened. This place is huge. Rail nodded. It had to be. This wasn't just a battle station. It was a research lab. Leora frowned. Researching what? Rail hesitated, then pointed to a blinking red section on the map. That. The label sent a chill down Leora's spine. Containment zone. Warnings from the past. Rail brought up an old log entry, the text distorted but still readable. Date: final year of the Ketheri War. Status: critical failure. Message: containment breach detected. The experiment has failed. The Ketheri are adapting. We cannot stop them. We are sealing this facility. Do not open it. Do not return. The war is lost. Leora swallowed hard. They were experimenting on the Ketheri. Rail's expression darkened. They weren't just fighting them. They were trying to control them. Leora felt her stomach turn. The Ketheri had been a nightmare, an enemy that devoured entire colonies, their strange biology making them almost impossible to kill. Humanity had only survived by using desperate, brutal tactics. But the war had ended, or so she had thought. Rail turned away from the console. We have to leave. Leora gripped his arm. Not yet. If we're the first humans to see this in a century, we can't just. The ground shook violently. The warning lights turned red. The air filled with a low, inhuman growl. Rail's face hardened. They're waking up. Escape or fight. A loud bang echoed from the sealed door behind them. Clawed hands slammed against the metal, denting it. The creatures weren't waiting anymore. Leora pulled her rifle up, ready to fight. Rail grabbed her wrist. No, we don't fight here. We run. Before she could argue, he pressed a sequence on the control panel. A side passage hissed open, leading into darkness. This way, he ordered. Leora hesitated. The Ketheri were out there, but if they stayed here, they'd be trapped. No choice. She followed him into the passage. Behind them, the metal door buckled, and the first horrifying shape squeezed through. Leora stole a glance back and felt her blood run cold. It was tall, armored in black kitten, its many eyes glowing like embers. Its sharp, twisting limbs moved unnaturally fast. And worst of all, it spoke. Not in words, but in a voice that scraped against her mind. A voice filled with hunger. More have come. Leora gasped. They can talk. Rail didn't stop. They've always been able to. We just never lived long enough to hear them. They ran. The buried army. The passage led them deeper underground, where the air grew colder. The red emergency lights flickered along the walls. Then suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Leora's breath caught. All around them were Ketheri pods, thousands of them, lined up like an army waiting for orders. Most were still closed, but some were cracked open. Leora turned to Rail, her voice hushed. How many of them are still alive? Rail exhaled slowly. Too many. Leora looked back at the pods. They weren't just trapped down here. They were being kept here, preserved. Rail nodded grimly. That's why this base was sealed. Not to keep people out, but to keep them in. A loud clicking sound echoed behind them. Leora spun around. More Ketheri figures crawled from the shadows, their glowing eyes locked onto her. Rail lifted his energy blade. Run or fight. Leora raised her rifle. Both. The first Ketheri lunged. Leora fired first. Her rifle lit up the darkness, plasma bolts striking the nearest Ketheri. The energy seared through its armor, but the creature kept coming. Rael moved like lightning, his energy blade humming as he sliced through another Ketheri's limbs. The severed parts twitched on the ground, but the monster didn't scream. It simply kept advancing, dragging itself forward with unnatural determination. Lyra cursed under her breath. They don't feel pain. More Ketheri emerged from the shadows, their chitinous bodies glistening in the red emergency light. Their glowing eyes flickered with ancient hunger. Rael grabbed Leora's arm. We can't fight them all. We have to go. Now. Leora knew he was right. There were too many. Staying meant death. She fired one last shot, then turned and ran after Rael. A desperate escape. The tunnels twisted and turned, endless passages leading deeper into the ruins. The walls shook as the Ketheri pursued them, their claws scraping against the stone. Lyra's breath came fast. They were getting closer. Up ahead, Rael skidded to a stop. Dead end. Lyra's heart sank. A massive metal door blocked their path, rusted but sturdy. Rael quickly examined the control panel beside it. I can override it, but it'll take time. Leora turned, gripping her rifle. We don't have time. The Ketheri were here. The first lunged from the shadows, its claws flashing. Lyra barely dodged, rolling aside as she fired. The shot hit its chest, but it barely slowed. Another came from the left. Lyra spun and kicked, her boot slamming into its head. The creature staggered, but another took its place. There were too many. Rael cursed under his breath as he worked the controls. Almost. Got it. Leora fired again, but her rifle beeped. Out of charge. Before she could reload, a Ketheri pounced. It was too fast. Lyra braced for the impact. But Rael was faster. His blade flashed, cutting the Ketheri down midair. Its body collapsed, twitching violently. Rael spun toward her. Move. The door hissed open. They rushed inside. Rael slammed his fist on the panel, sealing the door just as the Ketheri reached them. The creatures clawed at the metal, their shrieks muffled behind it. For a moment, there was silence. Lyra leaned against the wall, catching her breath. That was too close. Rael exhaled, gripping his blade. They're getting smarter. Leora looked at him. What do you mean? Rael's face was grim. They didn't chase us mindlessly. They were coordinating, learning, adapting. Leora shivered. That wasn't normal. The Ketheri were always dangerous, but if they were evolving intelligence, humanity was in more danger than anyone had ever realized. The Queen's secret. Leora straightened, clutching the sealed message from the Queen. She knew. Rael turned to her. What? Leora held up the message. The Queen. She didn't just send me to find you. She sent me here to confirm this. She knew the Ketheri weren't dead. She must have suspected something was still buried here. Rael's eyes darkened. Then why didn't she warn the world? Leora shook her head. I don't know. Rael took a step toward her. Open it. Leora hesitated. The Queen's orders were clear. Deliver it to Rael, but do not open it. But after what she had seen, after nearly dying in this nightmare, she broke the seal. A small holographic device activated, and a message appeared in the air. The Queen's voice echoed through the chamber. Rael Voss, if you are hearing this, then my worst fears are confirmed. The Ketheri are not dead, and I need your help to stop them. Lyra and Rael exchanged glances. The message continued. Humanity's greatest mistake was believing the war ended. The truth is, we never won. We only delayed the inevitable. The Ketheri were never truly defeated. They were merely contained. Rael clenched his fists. And now, they are waking up. A dangerous mission. The Queen's hologram flickered. You are the only one who can stop them, Rael. You fought them before. You know their tactics. And more importantly, you know the truth that was hidden from the public. Rael's expression darkened. Lyora could see the weight of old memories behind his eyes. The queen continued. There is a failsafe buried deep within this ruin. A weapon built in secret. One that can stop the Ketheri for good. But I fear it is also their target. You must reach it before they do. Lyora's heart pounded. A weapon. The queen's voice grew softer. I trust you, Rael, and I trust the one who carries this message. Together, you must finish what was started a century ago. The hologram faded. Silence. Lyora looked at Rael. A weapon? What kind of weapon could destroy them? Rael didn't answer immediately. He turned toward a door at the far end of the chamber. The kind, he said finally, that should never have been made. Lyora felt a chill. But we don't have a choice, do we? Rael shook his head. No, we don't. Behind them, the sound of claws scratching against metal grew louder. The Ketheri were coming, and they were running out of time. Lyora and Rael moved fast, knowing the Ketheri were already tearing through the door behind them. The queen's message had revealed the truth. A secret weapon was hidden deep within the ruins. A weapon designed to destroy the Ketheri completely. But Rael's expression was troubled. Lyora could see it in the way he clenched his fists. He knew something she didn't. They ran through the dimly lit corridor, emergency lights flickering overhead. The passage sloped downward, leading into the deepest level of the facility. Lyora's breath was heavy. If this weapon is here, why didn't they use it before? Rael didn't answer immediately. Then, in a low voice, he said, because it's not just a weapon. Lyora frowned. What do you mean? Before Rael could explain, the ground shook violently. A roar echoed from behind them, louder than before. Rael's face darkened. They've broken through. Lyora turned and saw them. The Ketheri swarmed into the corridor. Faster, stronger, more of them. Their glowing eyes burned in the darkness, their claws ripping through metal and stone. Lyora's pulse raced. There was no time to talk. Rael grabbed her wrist. Move. They ran. The vault. The passage ended in a massive chamber, larger than anything they had seen before. Towering metal pillars lined the walls, and at the center of the room stood a massive, sealed vault. The words above the vault door sent a chill through Lyora's spine. Project Genesis. Rael cursed under his breath. I knew it. Lyora turned to him. What is this? Rael's face was grim. It's not a weapon, Lyora. It's something much worse. Before she could ask more, the Ketheri were upon them. Lyora raised her rifle and fired, but there were too many. The creatures crawled along the walls, closing in from all sides. Rael activated the vault's console, typing rapidly. Buy me time. Lyora gritted her teeth. No pressure, right? She took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and opened fire. Plasma shots lit up the chamber, striking the Ketheri. Some fell, but others leaped forward, dodging her attacks. One lunged straight at her. Lyora dodged, barely avoiding its razor-sharp claws. She swung the butt of her rifle into its face, knocking it back. Another Ketheri came at her from the side, too fast to stop. But before it could strike, Rael's blade flashed. The creature collapsed, cut in half. Rael didn't stop moving. Almost there. The vault hissed, gears grinding as the door slowly unlocked. Lyora shot another Ketheri, but there were too many. One clawed her shoulder. She cried out, stumbling back. The pain burned, but she couldn't stop. More Ketheri charged toward them. Then, the vault door slid open. The truth about Project Genesis. Rael grabbed Lyora and pulled her inside. The vault door slammed shut just as the Ketheri reached it. For a moment, silence. Lyora pressed a hand to her bleeding shoulder, breathing hard. We made it. Rael didn't answer. He was staring at the center of the vault. Lyora followed his gaze. then felt her heart stop. Inside the chamber was a pod, a massive reinforced containment unit, and inside, something moved. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "What is that?" Rael exhaled, stepping forward. His voice was heavy. "The real reason the war ended. The real reason the Ketheri were stopped." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean?" Rael nodded. "They didn't just fight the Ketheri. They created something to become their predator." Leora felt a chill run through her. "They made a new life form." Rael placed a hand on the pod. Frost covered the glass, but she could see the shape inside. A humanoid figure, not quite human, not quite alien. Rael's voice was low. "Not life. A weapon." The pod systems blinked to life. Warning messages flashed across the screens. Cryogenic stasis ending. Project GENESIS initiating. Lyra took a step back. "You woke it up." Rael didn't move. It was always going to wake up. A deep rumbling filled the vault. The pod hissed as its seals began to release. Then, a hand slammed against the glass. Leora's breath caught. The thing inside was waking up. Rael clenched his fists. This is it, the final battle. The thing humanity was too afraid to use before. Leora swallowed. "And now we're setting it loose." Rael's eyes met hers. "We don't have a choice." The pod opened, and the weapon stepped out. A hissing cloud of frost poured from the pod as its seals fully unlocked. Lyra tensed, gripping her rifle tightly as the figure inside stepped forward. At first, it looked human, tall, strong, its form wrapped in a thin layer of biometallic armor. But when its eyes opened, Leora knew the truth. This was no human. Its eyes glowed with golden light, shifting like liquid fire. Its body moved too smoothly, almost unnatural in its perfection. The air around it hummed with power. Rael stood still, watching. "Project Genesis," he whispered. The figure tilted its head, studying them. Then, in a voice that sent a chill through the room, it spoke. "Designation confirmed. Ketheri threat detected." It turned toward the sealed vault door. Outside, the Ketheri howled and scratched, their hunger shaking the walls. The creatures felt it now. They knew. Something stronger than them had awakened. Rael stepped forward. "Do you remember your mission?" The figure turned its golden eyes toward him. "Primary directive. Extermination of the Ketheri species." Leora felt her stomach tighten. The thing inside the pod, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a living weapon. A beam designed for one purpose alone. Rael's voice was steady. "Then it's time to finish what was started." The walls trembled. The Ketheri were about to break through. Project Genesis stepped forward. Lyra barely had time to process what happened next. With one motion, the being raised its hand. A pulse of pure energy erupted from its palm, slamming into the vault door. The metal melted instantly, turning into molten slag. The Ketheri screeched as the entrance was blown apart. Then, Genesis moved, faster than anything Leora had ever seen. The last stand. The first Ketheri leaped forward. It never had a chance. Genesis grabbed it midair, crushing its body like paper. Without hesitation, it threw the corpse aside and attacked the next. Lyra and Rael watched, frozen, as the battle unfolded. Genesis was a storm. Its hands became weapons, its movements faster than the eye could follow. Each time a Ketheri lunged, Genesis countered with lethal precision. One Ketheri's claws lashed out. Genesis caught its arm and tore it clean off. Another tried to attack from behind. Genesis spun, delivering a strike that shattered its skull. The creatures had no defense. Lyra had seen war before. She had fought alongside the best soldiers of humanity. But nothing compared to this. Genesis wasn't just a soldier. It was a force of nature. The Ketheri screeched in panic, realizing their mistake. They had come to hunt. Now, they were the prey. The cost of power. Leora turned to Rael. You knew this would happen. Rael didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Genesis. I fought the Ketheri before. I knew they were never truly gone. I knew. One day, we'd have to use this. Leora swallowed hard. But is it under control? Before Rael could answer, Genesis spoke again. Threat level. Contained. Mission incomplete. Seeking next target. Its golden eyes turned toward them. Leora's blood turned cold. Genesis took a step forward. Directive remains. Eliminate all Ketheri DNA. Leora's voice came out hoarse. Wait, what does that mean? Rael's expression hardened. The war lasted for decades, Leora. His voice was quiet. The Ketheri didn't just attack us. They merged with us. Leora's breath caught. No. Rael nodded grimly. Some of us, some humans, carry traces of their DNA. Small mutations, hidden in our genes. Most don't even know. Leora's heart pounded. And Genesis. Rael's voice was firm. Genesis was programmed to wipe them all out. Genesis raised its hand. Energy crackled in its palm. Leora's body screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. Was she one of them? Was Rael? Genesis took another step forward. The choice. Rael acted first. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small circular device. A failsafe. Stand down, he commanded. Override code. Black sun. Genesis froze. Its golden eyes flickered. For a moment, nothing. Then, its entire body shuddered. The energy in its hands fizzled out. It staggered backward, confusion flashing across its features. Override. Conflict detected. Rael clenched his fists. Stand. Down. Genesis fell to one knee. Its eyes dimmed. Leora exhaled sharply, realizing she had been holding her breath. Did it work? Rael didn't answer immediately. He approached Genesis cautiously. The golden glow in its eyes was fading. Finally, it spoke. Directive overridden. Leora felt her knees weaken. It was over. A new dawn. Outside, the Ketheri were gone. The battle was over. The ruins stood silent, the air thick with the smell of burned metal and dust. Genesis remained on one knee, staring at its hands. Leora stepped closer. What happens now? Rael sighed. Genesis was designed to fight. Without a war, it has no purpose. Genesis looked up at them. For the first time, its golden eyes seemed different. Not just a weapon, not just a machine. Something more. Rael met its gaze. You have a choice now. Genesis blinked, processing. Choice. It stood slowly, looking at the rising sun through the broken ruins. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I choose to protect. Leora felt a lump in her throat. Maybe, just maybe, Project Genesis wasn't the end.